Well, Miles, Lindsay, it is an absolute pleasure to speak with both of you, especially coming off the back of having seen your new movie, The Dinner Party. How are you both keeping in these, well, let's just say, interesting times?
Well, interesting and troubling and complicated and difficult times
Yeah.
we're living in for sure. And that was before George Floyd and what's going on in our streets. So, we're trying to keep rational and stay sane and be socially responsible all at the same time. But it's a tricky time right now in America.
Absolutely. And of course, during this period, you've obviously been working to promote and push a movie. No easy task when you've got to do a lot of that remotely, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. And that's one of the things that Lindsay and I talk about daily with everything that's going on is, how do we feel about promoting our movie and talking about our movie with everything that's
going
happening,
on, yeah.
right? But we're also people who believe in art activism. We're people who believe that art really can make a difference, that it can change hearts and minds, that it can penetrate, that it can transport, that it can transcend, and maybe at the end of the day, make the world a little bit better place. So we're taking solace in that.
And if
Absolutely.
nothing else, we hope that at least people will be distracted from whatever problems they might be going through at the moment, even if for, an hour and 15 minutes.
It's escapism.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
exactly. And I think that's an integral part of what art is, right? Art takes us away. Art gives us the opportunity to focus on something that's not the horrific, tumultuous, angsty events that are going on in the outside world, for a couple of hours. And that is a value. That is absolutely a value. I know that. So we have a pack of dogs here, and sometimes we have to wrangle them. So I know that during the pandemic, Linz and I spent a lot of time watching films, watching television shows, just to take our mind off the stresses of what was going on outside in the world. And that was a salve for us. I mean, that was a great comfort for us. So even if what your art is doing is not activist or has some kind of social relevance or commentary or message that is useful or enlightening, the mere fact that if you can do something that is entertaining and that will take people's mind off of all this terrible stuff for a little while, to me, that's something that's worthwhile.
Absolutely. And of course, The Dinner Party, it is your new movie, certainly at this stage, as a horror site. And guys that watch horror pretty much every day, one of the highlights of 2020. We've had to describe it to friends and family and fans and stuff in short-term form because the review isn't out till tomorrow night. And we've tried to sum it up like an uber stylish, sexy and violent occult horror. Is that a fair summation in your eyes?
What do you think?
I think so.
Yeah, that'll work. That'll work for us. I mean, the film is inspired by and has elements of lots of different things, I think. And that's one of the things that really, I think, got our artistic engines revving, when we dove into it. And those things include Eyes Wide Shut, the Stanley Kubrick film. There's got a little bit of Mother, the Aronofsky film. Cook the Thief, His Wife and Her Lover. What else? Sometimes we say the Rocky Horror Picture Show, right? In that, it was a dark and stormy night. Oh, it's not storming in our movie, but it was a dark night, and our couple it goes to this mansion seemingly to take refuge, seemingly, on the promise that their life is about to improve for the better, and then they find out there's this rogues gallery of, eccentric, wacky elites with dark designs in mind. So yeah, but I think when you're trying to describe a piece just to the general populace, the simpler you can make it, the better. So dark occult horror, that'll work for me.
Yep.
And where does an idea like this get birthed from?
Well, you want to take that one, Lynn?
Sure. Actually, our joint producer, Jim Boulian, had this script already. He and Miles's co-writer, Michael Donovan Horn, had come up with this idea, and they presented it to Miles and asked him to come on the project, and then I came on by way of him. And so it really was Jim's, the germ of the idea really came from Jim's brain, which maybe tells you something about what kind of a guy he is.
And Michael Horn, who came to us with the embryonic version of this script, which had, I often say, the bones were really good, the characters were interesting. It just needed some narrative cohesion. It needed some through line to tie the whole thing together. And ultimately, that was the character of Sadie, which was not in those original drafts.
Yeah, she didn't exist.
And so she really became the flame around which all the moths revolve and fly, right? But what Michael did have that we've talked a lot about in that original script was this idea that a lot of seemingly bad folks, seemingly twisted, dark folks, have been victims in some way and have been traumatized in some way. And they have compartmentalized that trauma and mustered that trauma in very negative ways, in oftentimes, or not oftentimes, I hope it's sometimes, by becoming victimizers. Like all of the people at that table are troubled in some way, right?
Yeah.
And they have taken these dark, complicated, traumatic pasts that they've experienced, and they have turned it around, and now they are the abusers. And it's in terms of the psychoanalysis of all that. It's really fascinating. It's like the id unleashed and what the human psyche does to cope with trauma and to cope with horrific experiences, and sometimes it turns to the dark, and there's some pretty twisted stuff, and that's what's going on with some of our characters here in the dinner party. So that was there, and then we sort of took it and polished it and wove Sadie in. Hey, here's one of our children. That's Callie, and we added some other things that were that have been very meaningful to us in our work together. That is especially the place of women in society and exploring ideas of the female gaze instead of the male gaze, which has so permeated our industry since its inception, and of course this vast gulf between the haves and the have-nots, and what can the elites really get away with? Can they really get away with murder? And we wove all that together in this tapestry, and hoped that we created something that was both entertaining and transporting, and maybe had a little social heft too.
Okay, so that was what you were was that what attracted you to it, or did you kind of have to research, particularly in your position, Linda, when it came to the character, a lot of research into how you wanted the performance to be?
So because I knew that Miles had intended for me to play the role, basically as soon as she was invented, she kind of lived with me. So I didn't do a whole lot of intentional research, but I did. I thought, and Miles and I talked about this a lot, that we wanted her to feel a little bit otherworldly compared to the other characters. There's a musicality to her speech patterns that I don't have normally, and just a little bit of feel of like a dancer kind of going through space. But by and large, I really tried to keep it as organic as possible. And so having lived with her for so long, I had these ideas about what I wanted her to feel like and what I wanted her to look like. And then I just let it happen.
It's interesting as well, because when Sadie makes her appearance, she automatically comes across as someone who seems more self-aware than, say, the other characters are, almost like they're living in a dream world and she's not. And there's almost a point where it seems like your character is just making up the numbers at the table, but obviously becomes integral to the plot. almost like that hook. Very restrained before reeling with a hand. There's almost a sense of gleefulness when you get to do more, I guess, as an actor. Was that actually the case?
Yes. There were very many moments, especially around the table in the first conversation, when everybody at the, every member of the dinner party would be doing something fun and interesting and twisted, and I was just trying to not do that too. So it was those moments of the quietness within her character were difficult for me because everybody was playing and everybody was getting to do all of this stuff. So maybe that came across, that when I finally got to do something other than sit there and stare at Haley, that it was just a little bit more interesting for me as an actor, because that was a very difficult thing for me to do. I'm not a quiet, just like sit there and stare at someone person.
Yeah, when the proverbial worm turns, you can see a sort of sparkle in Lynn's eyes in the film, in the character's eyes, that, she's finally feeling unleashed, as it were. And I think it plays beautifully, whether Lynn's intended that with her actor hat or no. I think it definitely comes off in the film.
Absolutely, and it's certainly an intense set of scenes, particularly when we're talking about the dinner table in particular. It seems kind of obvious, but was that fun overall? Because the intensity, as you're watching as a viewer, you're just thinking, this looks uncomfortable for everybody.
I think it was challenging and rewarding. I wouldn't necessarily call it fun, because I think that there are like 25 pages or something of dialogue around that dinner table, and keeping that room and the space in between our various characters interesting and engaging is a tricky thing. Mm. I mean, it's very easy to visually exhaust a single room with the same characters in the same basic spaces very quickly for the viewer. And I mean, we live in a bit of a fast food society, right? The viewer can get bored very easily. So we worked very hard to keep it interesting, to keep the sparks flying between our characters. These characters have a very symbiotic relationship, and we wanted to play the whole thing kind of like a dance, right? Where they're always, or a fencing match, where they're always thrusting and parrying, and to keep it as active and as engaging as possible, despite the fact that they're effectively in one room sitting at a table. And we did that in a number of ways, by the pace of the dialogue, by what's being said, by the quality of the performance, by the framing and the movement of the camera. I hope that we pulled it off, but it was very challenging. And this was a very close-knit group of people, the seven folks sitting around that table. The only one, we knew Mike Mayhall is a longtime collaborator. He played Jeff. We had worked with Camille McEwen before, but Bill Sage, Sawandi Wilson, Allie Hart, this was our first time working with them, but we got very close very fast, and there was this kind of esprit de corps that developed very quickly and organically, and I think that was critical to the success, especially of those scenes, where it's all about the relationship and the camaraderie and the chemistry between those characters.
I think it's really important that we all kind of bonded in that way, because we were shooting overnights.
Yeah.
So there were days when we were at that table from 11 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock in the morning. And so all of us were a little bit delirious. and so having that kind of that friendship and that connection with each other kept us grounded, I think, and kept any of us from getting weary or frustrated or anything like that. There were really very, very few diva moments amongst the people at that table there. So, yeah.
One of my favorite things to tell people about it is that it's a horror movie, but that's not what I remember from it. And you already mentioned the characters and the cast. You assembled an incredible set here who do, I think, some of this year's most memorable performances. You must be very satisfied with the performances overall.
And casting is everything when it comes to directing. It really is.
90% of directing.
Yeah, maybe.
Is casting.
I mean, 80, 90, truly. I mean, if you cast if you have a good script and you cast the right actors in their respective roles, suddenly the job becomes so much easier, because a great actor can take a good piece of material and just elevate it exponentially. And that's what happened here. And, in some cases, we were just very, very lucky. I mean, Sawandi Wilson, who plays Sebastian, he just read for the thing on Actors Access audition, right? He just taped an audition and sent it to us.
Selling our lap.
And among hundreds and hundreds, or maybe more auditions. Allie Hart is in this movie because when we were talking to her agent, Rachel Sheedy, about Bill Sage, Rachel said, "I've got this actor, Allie Hart. She's young, she's green, she hasn't done a great deal, but she is going to be huge. I have so much faith in her. You've got to read her for this." And so we did, and she blew the producers away. So I mean, we were just very, very fortunate. Sometimes you just find the right people, and because film is such a collaborative, it's the right group of people, right? It's not just a single actor or a single crew member, but in this case, in terms of this cast, it was just the right 7 people around that table. And of course, I have to shout out to my buddy Richie Montgomery, who plays Brooks, and Jeremy London appears briefly in the film, and Sherry Eakin, and some other folks that were all wonderful. But the 7 people around that table really had to be perfect. And so we were very, very fortunate.
And other than your own, is there a character that you particularly feel an affinity towards?
I don't know. Do you want to answer that?
Well, I'll jump in and say that for me, the one that captured my imagination straight away, probably because he's the first person on the scene, so to speak, is Sawandi Wilson's Sebastian, who I found to be an absolute joy to watch.
Yeah, I that's probably who I would have singled out as well. He's sort of our Loki figure, right?
Right.
He's sort of our
love that.
Our god of mischief, right? Flitting around the proceedings and stirring up trouble, and what Sawandi brought to the table was honestly not exactly how I saw the character on the page, but better, and that's what a good actor does.
I also think it's interesting that that character doesn't get as much. He doesn't have the opportunity to explain himself ever, right? Every other character, we know something about them. We know that Vincent, does this. We know that Carmine is a doctor. We know that Agatha is a novelist, and that she, was abused by her father, and that she's a lesbian, and all of these things. But we don't really get a whole lot of that. So it's really interesting that he can put so much into his character and make it that memorable when we really don't know very much about him.
Yeah, his backstory is very shadowy. We don't really know exactly where he comes from or what he's doing there. And that was kind of intentional. But he just brought such charisma, and he's so mercurial, and so I think I'd be with you there. I think Sebastian would be the character that I would most gravitate toward. That would not be our own character.
You also managed to nail the balance of what is effectively good versus evil in the characters as well. Take your character, Vincent. He's almost kind of likable at first, particularly how he talks and interacts. Fine tightrope to walk. Was it something you were particularly conscious of, getting that balance right, where you don't want someone to become too likable when they're supposed to be a villainous character?
Yeah, I think it's complicated because you absolutely. I mean, the fact of the matter is, a lot of villains are engaging and charming and even funny. And magnetic, and
it's what allows them to become villains in the first place.
Well, and to gain a following, right? Yeah. So we wanted these characters to feel moderately likable and charismatic and charming and funny before the real turn happens, right? And you really get some sense of who they are. And that's a fine line, of course, because you don't want to glorify necessarily the horrific things that they're engaging in later in the film, but you have to keep the audience engaged and watching and magnetized toward what's happening, or you're lost. And hopefully you can imbue a little humor into the proceeding. And I think there's a lot of fun stuff that happens in the sort of back and forth with Sebastian and Carmine, and Vincent and Sebastian have this kind of rivalry. And so we really allowed ourselves to play with that.
It really comes across. And for both of you individually, what was your favourite scene to film?
My favorite scene to film was probably the ceremony in the altar room. Mostly, though, because the costume that I wore, and you really don't get to see very much of it, but the costume that I wore is directly modeled after the ceremonial clothing worn by Minoan snake goddess priestesses. Mm-hmm. So, and it's like from the floor up, it's all modeled after that. So I really enjoyed being able to recreate some kind of a historic costume for that. And then it's always cool being a priestess. So.
And that set is one of my favorite sets I've ever worked on in 5 features and 4 shorts, or whatever it's been. So Julie Tosh, kudos to Julie Tosh, our production designer, and to Lindsay, who designed our costumes.
And Georgia Robles did a lot in that room as well with Julie, and man, they really made that room awesome.
Yeah. My favorite scene to shoot was probably the run up to and then the fight with Haley in the pool room.
Oh.
Yeah. Just the way that he tries to sort of cajole and her, by basically telling her, this can be, just briefly and lightly painful or excruciatingly painful. It's up to you. And then that fight breaks out, and which was just a lot of fun. And we had Mike Mayhall, who played Jeff and was our stunt coordinator, did a wonderful job. And Allie was just so game. And Allie had 2 stunt doubles in this show, and they barely got to work because Allie was like, "No, I want to do it. I want to do it."
And she just would say, "Just let me try it once. And if I can't do it, then the stunt can try." And every time she got it.
Yeah. So, but that scene was a lot of fun to shoot. Just in I don't get to do enough fight scenes. I come from a background, and in college I was, having rapier dagger fights on stage and doing all this kind of cool stuff. But I guess in my adult life as a performer, I just haven't gotten to do that kind of thing enough. So that was really fun.
That's fantastic. It's certainly not a family film, that's for sure. Was there ever a point where you thought, man, are we going too far here?
Yes. I
don't think so.
Well, I don't know. The necrophilia stuff, I was a little worried about. And I think maybe I did tamp some of that down a little bit in the writing of it. But at the same time, in large part, I just believe you've got to go for it. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things, coming back to this, to talking about Mother, and a lot of Aronofsky stuff is like this. You may love it, you may hate it, but you can't accuse him of not swinging for the fence. I mean, he goes for it. Whether it's The Fountain or Noah or Requiem or Mother, whatever it might be. And I'm one of those believers in going big or going home. And granted, you're going to offend some people. Granted, some people are going to go, this is too much. But my hope is always that the whole is more powerful or more effective than the parts which might be too offensive or too much.
Absolutely. I didn't think any point. I knew you were going to, if you were going to mention any scene, you were going to mention that scene, because I was watching it. It was like 3 a.m. I was on night shifts at work where nothing happens, and I had to double take at that, and I was, whoa, that's happening. But in modern horror, shocking an audience is near impossible. Not that you're going out of your way to do it, but nothing should surprise anymore. We've gone quite far already, I think.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I aspire to do is if I am going to try to shock the audience, I want to shock them psychologically, not with gore or blood or, you know, I'm not a big fan of body horror and that sort of stuff. I want to be the earworm that gets in their mind so that it's rattling around in their head for the next few days. I just think that's infinitely more powerful.
And for both of you, you've worked together in the past. Do you think, personally, this is your most accomplished work? Not just from an actor standpoint, but also from director, in your case, Miles?
Why don't you start with that one?
I think maybe. It's interesting that when we first cut the film together and everything, I thought this was my weakest performance as an actor. I apparently am in the minority with that opinion, but I think that just as producers, you know, we've come across so many fires and we've had to put out so many fires that we've just kind of gotten used to it. So I think that in that sense, it was, you know, kind of a culmination of all of our other efforts together. And as a costumer, I definitely think that there are some fun stories that I got to tell on this one that I haven't really explored in other film. And it makes me really excited for the next couple of projects that we're working on because I'm going to go for it.
Yeah. Lindsay is such a critic. I mean, she really is, especially of her own work. She is one of the most creative and talented people and intelligent people that you'll ever meet. And I really do think her Sadie is probably the apex of her work as an actor and a costume designer. That's just my 2 cents. I think that for me, this is probably my most polished, thoughtful work as a director. And I think that has to do with the fact that I had a very clear idea of what I wanted this film to be and where we wanted to go. And we spent a lot of time with Michael Williams, our director of photography, and with Julie, our production designer, and with Lindsay, our costume designer, and with our cast, with whom we had conversations with each and every one of them before they ever landed on set about what this film was. And we started with Baroque paintings as inspiration, the work of Caravaggio and Ribera in particular, and that informed basically every choice we made in terms of the design and the color choices in this film. As an actor, it's hard to say. I mean, I've done, I know, 50 plus movies and TV shows and all kinds of theater, and to single out one performance, I don't know. I really like some moments in this film, but as every actor, it's just very, very hard to critique.
It is hard to judge yourself.
Yeah.
I don't know if it certainly was one of the more fun roles I've taken on, and really allowed me to just stretch my legs and play. And I would say this, and the role of Ray in The Hollow. I don't know if you saw that film, our second film, where I played this horrible, morally compromised sheriff's deputy from, the dirty South.
You were a git.
Yeah, right. So that role was really rewarding to inhabit. But this one, I really enjoyed playing this sort of elegant, slightly snide, devilish villain type of role. And the way he plays off of the other characters, and the way he defers to Sadie. There's a lot of interesting stuff. That Vosik monologue was really, really cool to work on. That's just such a haunting story and piece anyway. But so yeah, I don't know. From a director's perspective, I would definitely say it is the film that we spent the most time talking about, planning, prepping, all those things that you never get to do in an independent film, and I think that is reflected in the final product. So in that way, I would say yes, it is probably the film where we came closest to accomplishing the vision we set out to accomplish. Of course, I think it's Spielberg that says you never complete a film, you just abandon it, and to some degree or another, you feel that on every movie. But this one, what we came up with feels pretty close to what we envisioned at the end of the day.
I love that quote. And I guess the work never really stops either, because you finish shooting, you do all of that, and then you have to promote it. I wanted to ask you about one specific thing that has stood out the most in all the promotional material that has come our way and seen available, and it's one of the covers that's kind of doing the rounds, and you're on it, Miles, in a specific pose. Have you seen this, where you have Thingy by the throat?
Yeah.
That, how much involvement did you have with that choice? Because I can't tell you how eye-catchingly wonderful that is.
Well, let me tell you something about that image. It's a funny story. We're on set one night, in between setups, with Bill Sage. It's Bill Sage, me, Allie, Lindsay, and Bill Sage just got a new iPhone with the whatever the latest iPhone.
Yeah.
And he's got all these photo settings he's showing us about.
And Miles has a very similar iPhone, just the generation earlier, that also has
and he's
similar
like,
settings.
let me show you what this can do. Let me show you what this can do.
Trying to teach Miles how to use his phone.
So he's like, you guys stand over there and pose. And so he's just taking some random shots, and that was one of the shots. That was one of the shots.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so we loved that shot so much, we were like, we need to use this, And so that's how that shot came to be. We thought it was very visceral. We thought it was very eye-catching. We thought it immediately, because poster art, publicity art, it needs to draw you in. It needs to take your mind somewhere, right? You need to be going, wonder what's going on in that film. And we felt that image did that. So we ran with it. So thank you, Bill Sage, for your photography skills.
On an iPhone.
Absolutely amazing. Right, last thing before I let you go. This is a very complete feel about it. This is not, you don't sequel bait, you don't drop really anything at the end to suggest there's, we're going to come back to this. But would you ever be tempted to pull on this thread again?
It's funny you said... You are probably the fourth or fifth person, member of the press, that's asked me that question. And the answer is, I think that there's so many places that you could go next. The mythology surrounding this cult and the without revealing anything too much, the Sadie character, I think is fascinating. And so. And the reviews we're getting for this film have just been so great and humbling and heartening and empowering, right, in a way, that this story, this type of story and these characters are something that, these types of characters, I should say, because,
most of them died.
Well, spoiler alert.
Oh!
Well, anyway, they don't know who. Anyway. So I actually, this is breaking news, I think. It's breaking news.
Oh yeah.
I got on the phone. I got on the phone with my co-writer Michael Donovan Horn the other day, and we started plotting out a potential sequel that we are knocking around right now. It's in the final draft software, and we'll see where it goes.
Watch this space. That is very, very exciting. Lindsay, Miles, thank you so much for your time. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of the film. Look out for our review. It'll be on the socials. It's very positive, I'll tell you that now.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you, and we appreciate you raising the profile of independent filmmakers and lifting up their voices. That means a great deal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching. You can check us out on gbhbl.com, as well as on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Tumblr. Go to Patreon and help us out over there. That's patreon.com/GBHBL, as well as Big Cartel, where you can find some of our merchandise. We have a podcast running on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts. And of course, if you like this video, do us a favour, hit the subscribe button and help the channel grow. Games, horror and heavy metal. What else is life for?